your soulmate is already married. But what they did next will shock you. Before you scroll past this, before you let tonight dissolve into the next thing and the thing after that, I want you to do one small thing for me. Take one slow breath. Let your shoulders drop a little from wherever they have been holding themselves all day. Because there is a reason this found you tonight, and it is not the reason you might expect. It is not a dramatic reason, it is not a magical one, it is something quieter than that, and in a way something far truer. You have been carrying a feeling lately that you have not been able to name. A pull toward someone. A warmth that arrives uninvited, in the middle of an ordinary afternoon, or in the last hour before sleep, when your defenses are down, and your heart speaks more plainly than it does in daylight, and folded somewhere inside that warmth, there is a sadness, a small ache, you keep trying to talk yourself out of, because deep down you already know what makes this whole feeling so complicated. The person who feels like home to you is not free. They belong, on paper and in promise, to someone else, and so you have learned to make this feeling smaller than it is. You have learned to tuck it into a drawer in the back of yourself, and close it gently, the way you would close the door to a room you are not allowed to enter. You have practiced the little speeches you give yourself. It is nothing. It is just a passing thing. Some doors were shut long before you ever arrived at them, and there is no use standing in front of one that was never going to open. You have told yourself to be reasonable, to be mature, to let it go, and maybe, for stretches of time, it works. The feeling goes quiet, but then it returns, the way a tide returns, without asking permission, and you are right back where you started, holding something tender that you do not know what to do with. Here is what I have learned about feelings like this one. They do not always obey the rules we set for them. You can decide a thing is forbidden, and still find it living inside you. You can label it impossible, and still feel it breathing. And tonight, I want to tell you what really happened on the other side of this connection. On their side of it, because I promise you, it is not the story you have been quietly writing in your head when you cannot sleep. What they did next is not what you imagined. It is something far more surprising, and far more beautiful, and by the time we reach the end of this, you may finally understand why this person came into your life at all, and what they were really here to give you. Let me begin where it actually began, which is somewhere ordinary. It was not a thunderclap. It was not one unforgettable evening that the rest of life would orbit around forever after. It was a conversation that should have ended and been forgotten, a moment so small that almost no one in the world would have noticed it. A passing exchange, a few words traded in a doorway, or across a table, or through a screen, the kind of thing that happens 100 times a week and means nothing. But you noticed, something in you leaned forward when it had no reason to, and as strange as this may be to hear, so did they, because connection is rarely loud at the start. We imagine it should announce itself, that there should be music, that we should know in an instant, but more often it arrives the way morning light arrives, slowly, gently, touching the edges of a room long before anyone realizes the darkness has begun to lift. A word here, a glance held half a second too long there, a feeling of familiarity that did not quite make sense, because by every reasonable measure, the two of you should have stayed strangers to each other. There was no logic to it. You had not earned it through years of history, and yet something in them recognized something in you, and something in you recognized it back. And I want to be careful and honest about what that recognition actually was, because this is the part people always get wrong. It was not desire, at least not at first, it was recognition. Those are different things, though they often travel close together. Desire wants to take, recognition simply knows. It is the quiet, almost disorienting sense of meeting a person who somehow already feels known to you, as though you are not being introduced but reminded, as though some part of you had been waiting, without knowing it was waiting, and here at last was the face that matched the feeling. That is what passed between you. Not a wildfire, a recognition, a soft and startling sense of, oh, there you are. Now here is the part that matters most, and I want you to hold it carefully in both hands, because the kind of story you are used to hearing would lie to you here. The familiar version of this story, the one in the songs and the films, and the late-night fantasies, would tell you that this person became utterly consumed by you, that they could not eat, or sleep or think, that your name became a fever in them, that they were secretly, helplessly plotting their way back to you, counting the hours until they could see you again, willing to set their whole life on fire, just to be near you for an evening. That is the story we are trained to want, because it flatters the ache. It tells us our longing is so powerful that it must be mirrored on the other side, equally desperate, equally undone. But that is not what this is, and I think you deserve the honest version, because the honest version is the only one that can actually set you free. What truly happened is gentler than that, and braver than that, and in the end far more meaningful than any fever could ever be. They felt the pull, they were not made of stone, and I will not pretend they did not feel it, but they understood, almost immediately, what it could not become. They were not naive about it. They were not a person sleepwalking toward a cliff, telling themselves it was only a hill. They knew the exact shape of their own life. They knew the promise they had made, the words they had given, the people who had built their days around the steadiness of that promise, and so the very first thing they did with this feeling was not to chase it. It was to be honest with themselves about it. Stay with me here, because this is where the story turns in a direction you did not see coming. There were nights, yes. I will not pretend the feeling vanished obediently, the moment they decided to be wise. That is not how the heart works, not for them, and not for you. There were nights when your memory surfaced without invitation, when it slipped past every guard they had posted. A song would come on, and somehow it would be about you, even though it had been written long before you existed in their world. A phrase would drift by in an ordinary conversation with an ordinary person, and suddenly, there you would be again, sitting quietly in the middle of their thoughts, like a candle someone had forgotten to put out. And in those moments, they did wonder about you. I would be lying to tell you they did not. They wondered what made you laugh. When no one was watching, the real laugh, the unguarded one. They wondered what you had survived in your life, that you never spoke about, the private weather of you, that you keep behind your eyes. They wondered why a person they barely knew could feel so much like a missing piece, like a word they had been trying to remember for years, and could only now almost say. These are tender questions. They are not small or cheap, and they did not pretend the questions were not there, did not lie to themselves that the feeling had simply evaporated. They let the wondering exist, but and here is the line that the usual story always erases: wondering is not the same as wanting to take. You can hold a beautiful thing in your attention, and still decide not to reach for it. You can let yourself feel the warmth of a person, without ever deciding that warmth has handed you permission to disturb that person's life, or, to walk away from your own. And so they did something quietly extraordinary, though it would not have looked like much from the outside. They let themselves feel the warmth of knowing you, the genuine glow of it, without converting that warmth into action, without letting it become an opening move. There is more discipline in that than the world ever gives credit for. It is easy to do nothing when you feel nothing. It is a far harder and rarer thing to feel a great deal and still choose stillness, not out of fear, not out of coldness, but out of care. There came an evening, an unremarkable one, when it all became impossible to keep at the edges any more. And I want to be clear, because your imagination may already be racing ahead. Nothing happened. There was no confession whispered in a parked car. There was no crisis, no slammed door, no scene. There was only a silence at the end of a long day, the particular kind of silence that arrives once the noise of living finally settles, the kind that strips away every distraction and leaves a person entirely alone with what is real inside them. You know this silence. We all meet it eventually. And in that silence, the feeling stepped forward, the way a thing you have been avoiding will finally step forward when there is nowhere left to look but at it, and it asked simply, to be looked at directly. So they looked. They did not flinch away from it this time, did not bury it under busyness or noise. They sat with it, the way you would sit beside something fragile, something you did not want to break, something that deserved to be handled with tenderness, rather than fear, and they asked themselves the only question that ever truly matters in a moment like this one. Not, do I feel something for this person? That question had already been answered 100 times over. The answer was obvious, and there was no use pretending otherwise. The real question, the one that decides what kind of person you are going to be, was this: what is the most honest and the most loving thing I can actually do with what I feel? And this, my friend, is where they did the thing that will surprise you. This is the part, the title promised, though it will not look the way you expected a shock to look. They did not send the message you have half imagined them sending, the one that begins so innocently, and means so much. They did not let a quiet feeling grow slowly and deniably into a quiet entanglement, the kind that starts as friendship, and becomes something neither person ever quite admits to. They did not begin gently rearranging the small architecture of their life, so that your paths would cross more often than chance alone would ever have allowed. A coincidence here, an excuse to be in the same place there. They had the imagination to see exactly how all of that would go, because they are not a fool, and they could feel how easy it would be, and then they did the opposite of all of it. They made a decision to honor you, by refusing to make you a secret, because somewhere in that long reflection, they arrived at a truth that most people go their whole lives without ever reaching. Real love, the kind that actually deserves the name, does not ask another person to live in the shadows. It does not turn someone into a temptation to be quietly managed, or a regret to be carefully hidden, or a name that can never be said aloud in the daylight of an honest life. Love that requires concealment is not love at its full height. It is something smaller wearing love's clothing, and so the most loving thing they could possibly offer you was not their longing, it was their restraint. It was to protect the wholeness of your life and of their own, to leave you free rather than tangled, to keep you out of a situation that, however sweet it might have felt in certain hours, could only ever have cost you more in the end than it gave you in the moment. They chose integrity. And I need you to hear this part clearly, because almost no one understands it, and it changes everything. That choice was not a rejection of you. It can feel like rejection, I know, when someone does not reach for you and you wanted to be reached for. But it was the opposite of rejection. It was, in its own quiet and unglamorous and largely invisible way, a form of respect for you that most people will never receive from anyone in their entire lives. To be wanted is common enough. To be wanted and protected, to matter to someone so much that they refuse to let their wanting harm you, that is rare. That is the rarest thing. I know this is not the ending, the title seemed to promise. The title promised a shock, and perhaps you assumed the shock would be passion, or pursuit, or someone dramatically leaving everything behind, and showing up at your door in the rain with your name on their lips. We have been taught that this is what devotion looks like, but sit with the real shock for a moment, because it runs far deeper than any of that, and it will hold up under the weight of your whole life. In a way the fantasy never could. The shock is that you mattered enough to someone that they refused to turn you into collateral. The shock is that the single most meaningful thing they ever did for you was to leave the door of your life, uncluttered, unblocked, unburdened, so that the right person could one day walk straight through it, without having to step over a complication. You never deserved to be carrying. There is a strange and steady and unshowy kind of love in that. It is the love that protects you from a story that would have wounded you. Even when wanting you might have been the easier and more flattering path to take. Now let me tell you why this person came into your life at all. Because this is the part I most want you to carry with you, when this is over, and you go back to your days. For a long time you may have believed that the entire purpose of this connection was the person themselves. That the feeling was an arrow, pointing directly at them, that the ache was about them and only them. That some cruel and careless timing had placed exactly the right soul behind exactly the wrong set of circumstances, like a cosmic joke told at your expense. It is a natural conclusion. It is also, I think, the wrong one, because what if this connection was never meant to be a destination at all? What if it was a doorway? There is a great difference between the two. A destination is a place you are supposed to arrive and remain. A doorway is something you pass through on your way to somewhere you could not have reached any other way. Look at what this feeling actually did inside you, not what you wished it would do, but what it really did. It reminded you that you are still capable of feeling this deeply. It proved to you, after everything you have been through, and everything that may have gone numb along the way, that the part of your heart you might have quietly assumed had gone permanently, still is in fact very much alive and beating. That is no small revelation. Some people spend years, even decades, privately convinced that the kind of recognition you felt simply does not exist for them anymore. They decide it was a thing that belonged to a younger and more open version of their life, a chapter that has closed, a door that quietly sealed itself while they were busy surviving. They make a kind of peace with going without it. And then a connection like this one arrives, uninvited, impossible, unable to be kept, and even as it slips away, it leaves behind something it cannot take with it. Evidence, undeniable evidence that this depth is real, that you can still feel it, that it is still in you to give, and still possible for you to receive. That is not a side effect. That is the whole point. Because the love that is actually meant for you, the one that will be free to choose you in full daylight, the one that will ask for no secrecy, and create no wound in anyone, that love needs you to believe it is possible before it can find its way to you, and for so long perhaps, you did not believe it. Perhaps you had grown quietly resigned, without ever quite admitting it to yourself, telling yourself that the spark you once dreamed of was a thing of stories and other people's lives, not something this world would ever hand to you directly and without complication. That resignation is a kind of door too, and it was closed. This connection is what broke it open. It walked into your life, precisely because it could not stay, and as it passed through it, left the window unlatched behind it. It reawakened the part of you that knows how to recognize a soul when it appears. And now that part of you is awake, and the truth about that part of you is that once it wakes, it does not easily fall back asleep. So consider, just for a moment, who you have actually become across these weeks and months of feeling. You have become more honest with yourself than you were before, because you stopped pretending. This feeling was not happening. You have learned to sit with an emotion instead of sprinting away from it, the instant it became uncomfortable, and that is a skill most adults never master. You have rediscovered tenderness, and longing, and the strange and underrated courage it takes to feel something completely, even when you have made the decision not to act on it. You are more open now than you were when this began, more awake, more porous to beauty, more ready, and readiness, real readiness, the kind that is earned rather than declared, is the quiet condition that tends to arrive right before the very thing you have been waiting for finally appears. Here is what I need you to release now, gently, and entirely without shame, because there is no shame in any of this. Release the idea that the only soulmate available to you is one you have to share, or hide, or quietly wait in the wings for, hoping for an opening that honor will never allow. That belief will keep you standing forever at a door that was never going to open, growing older in a hallway, mistaking patience for loyalty when it is really just a way of staying stuck. The person who stirred all of this awake in you has already done their part. They woke you. They reminded you. And then, by deliberately choosing not to pull you down into the shadows with them, they kept your hands free for the love that can actually hold you in the open. The most honoring thing you can do in return is not to stay behind, in the longing, lighting candles for a door. Let the feeling have meant something real, without needing it to become a relationship it was never able to be. And let yourself imagine now, truly imagine, the version of all of this that is real and waiting. A connection with the very same depth you felt, the same uncanny familiarity, the same astonishing sense of having met a stranger who somehow already feels like home, but with one single difference that changes absolutely everything about it. This one is free, free to be spoken out loud in your own voice, to your own friends, without lowering it, free to be chosen openly, in front of everyone, in the bright and ordinary light of a Tuesday, with no apology owed to anyone, free to grow in daylight instead of dimming in secret, free to take up its full size instead of being folded small enough to hide. That is what is coming. The recognition you felt was not a fluke, and it was not a cruelty. It was a preview. It was your own heart showing you in advance the precise temperature of the thing you are walking toward, so that when it finally does arrive, you will not second-guess it, you will not talk yourself out of it. You will simply know, because you have already felt its warmth once before, and your body remembers. You have been given the measuring stick. You know now what real recognition feels like. You will not mistake a lukewarm thing for it ever again. There is something quietly powerful about the way these things tend to move. If you watch closely, the connection that could not stay so often arrives, just before the connection that can, almost as though life uses the first one to remind you what you are looking for, and then sends the second one to actually give it to you. You are not behind, hear me say that plainly. You are not behind, and you are not too late, and nothing in your story is broken or wasted or beyond repair. The detour was not a punishment, it was a teacher, and the teacher has very nearly finished the lesson. What is approaching now is not a person you will have to share, or chase, or quietly grieve in private while smiling in public. It is a person who will be relieved to find you, who will not need to be convinced or talked into you, who will look at you in plain and unhidden light, and choose you without hesitation, because the version of love that was always meant for you was never going to require you to disappear in order to keep it. So tonight, let the ache soften, slowly, into gratitude. Be thankful for the one who showed you that your heart still works after everything. And thankful, too, that they cared enough about you to keep you free, rather than tangled, even when the other choice would have been easier for them. Hold no bitterness toward them, they gave you more than you knew. And then turn gently, the way you would turn toward a window at the first hint of morning, toward what is actually ahead of you. Keep your heart open, not toward the closed door behind you, but toward the wide open one you simply have not reached yet. Start to notice the new people who drift into your days, the unexpected conversations, the small and ordinary moments that have a quiet habit of becoming the beginning of everything, without warning. Because the same way, this last connection began so quietly, with nothing more than a word, a glance, a feeling of familiarity that did not make any sense at the time. The next one will most likely begin the very same way. So softly you could almost miss it, but this time, when you feel that unmistakable pull, you will not have to talk yourself out of it. You will not have to make it smaller, or hide it in a drawer, or close a door on it. This time, the door will open. This time, the person standing on the other side of it will be free to walk through and stay, and free to be chosen, and free to choose you back, out loud, in the daylight, for good. You were never meant to live in the shadows of someone else's life. You were always, from the very beginning, meant to be chosen in the light. And that, far more than any secret longing you have been carrying, is the truth that has been quietly trying to reach you all along.